from Dawn, the Secret Wine Society.
He wants to make sure everyone's awake.
Yeah.
Yes, happy Friday.
There's a lot of information in this episode.
Happy Friday to you, too, both of you. Anyway, oh, wow.
Thank you very much. She's already pouring.
Yeah, I see that. That's not a bad thing.
Yes.
Wow. This is funny. We're lining up shots of sake. Anyway, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having us again.
And wanted to say we had a great time at the event a couple of weeks ago.
We're really glad to have you guys down. It went very, very well.
And it was good to see some of the 15 show up and chat and sit around and enjoy some fine beverages. So that was great.
Yeah, you got to drink some nice sake, and we had some nice wines lined up from Reed. So it was a good time.
All right. So we're going to continue chatting about different types of sake and the production of it. And I think it was last time we were talking about the koji production. And now it's all about the yeasties and making the yeasties do their yeasty things.
Yeah, so this is very complicated. I mean, sake in general is...
That always right there gets the listener, oh, it's going to be complicated.
Well,
yeah.
but think of it this way. You remember the Rubik's Cube, right?
Yeah.
So you first see this thing, it seems impossible to solve. Well, now these kids are solving them in under 5 seconds because there are patterns to this. And so once you get the patterns, you'll be solving sake Rubik's Cube in 5 seconds.
So it all has to do with, so you've done the koji. Remember that? That's where you put the mold in with the steamed rice. It breaks down the starch into sugar so that the yeast have something to eat because they just can't eat the starch. So it has to be broken down into simple sugars. So now you get to the point where you introduce the yeast, but you get into complications with that as well.
Yeah, we're gonna start with an older method. So what we're gonna talk about today is the Kimoto method. And there's a few things that distinguish this. Number one, it was perfected during the Edo period. So that started in 1603. So that was when the Tokugawa shogunate set up in Edo, which is now Tokyo. Now at this time, the capital was still in Kyoto. But he took over and basically the entire country, and he was running it from Edo. Now, they used to brew sake all year round. It was called shiki jozo, just year-round brewing.
Mm-hmm.
But he enacted some laws. He's saying, wait a second, there's too much spoilage if you're doing this in the summer. It's too hot. So he said, we don't want to waste rice. So he forced everyone to do winter brewing, or you can call that kanzukuri. And once that was made necessary by these laws, they started to really dial in that system. Now, keep in mind, this is before microbiology. So they're kind of winging it, right? They have to figure out like how to make sake, and they just figure out, well, we do this, then we get this, and this works. So it's a lot of trial and error. So there's two terms for this. Your yeast starter, remember, like you said, we've already broken down the rice, and now we need to get the
yeast growing.
Correct. And you have to have the right yeast. So this was the part they didn't know, is like, how do we get a strong yeast for this fermentation? So the Kimoto method was perfected in this time frame. You needed colder temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're basically doing is they are creating this very thick paste. Now, they do that by, well, let's get into the sake first, and then I'll talk about it.
Okay. This is, by the way, really good.
Yeah, this is called Kasumi Tsuru Kimoto Extra Dry. And you see it is on the drier side. So this is 65% Seimai Buai, or the polishing rate. The I almost said grape, but the rice is Go Hyaku Mangoku. This brewery was founded in 1725 in a town called Kasumi Cho. But
well, I think they finally got it right, because this is...
Yeah, these guys specialize in Kimoto style and also one called Yamahai. That'll come after this one. But this Kimoto style of making sake is a throwback. They don't do it this way now for most sake because it's harder to do, labor intensive, and there's a higher failure rate. So basically what you're trying to do is create and they didn't know this at the time, but they need a lactic acid rich environment.
And that's because it kills bacteria that otherwise would stunt the yeast, right?
Right. You don't have refrigeration. This is back when they were kind of figuring out how to make this not spoil. Now, keep in mind the Edo period, there was a lot of spoilage, 6 out of 10 bottles. And so to get spoilage down, first of all, they want this yeast starter to start to develop a lactic acid rich environment which will protect it from ambient yeasts, at least weak ambient yeasts, and bacteria. So it's kind of a way of microbiological control. So
it's kind of sterilizing the environment for the yeast.
Right. So what they'll do is they'll take the rice, and after they steam it and they got the koji, everything's all ready to go, they'll put it in these bags. This is a step called ikameshi. So I said before, most sakes are made with this sokujo fast fermentation. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned there when they steam it, they're trying to get the middle to be soft and the outside to be hard. For this Kimoto method, you don't want that. So what they do is they actually wrap this in hemp bags and let it cool down. They want it to be hard on the inside and outside. They want the rice to be, for this style of yeast making or moto making. So for yeast starter, and the Japanese word is either Shubo or Moto, same exact meaning. In English, that's the yeast starter. Mm-hmm. The rice you're putting in, because you're going to pound it into a paste, you want the rice to be durable. You can't have it to be too thin. It can't be too watery. And the reason they want a paste, and I sent you that video of these guys like pounding it into a paste, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to get a low oxygen environment. That way the aerobic bacteria don't find it friendly to have, there's not enough air in it. They want all the air out of it as much as possible. Then you're going to get nitrate reducing bacteria in the very beginning, and they're going to make nitrous acid, which kind of hangs out until the lactic acid starts to build up. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, it's not amenable to bacteria or yeast unless the yeast is very strong. Now, at this point, like today, this one we have here, most of these people will add their own yeast from a lab. Mm-hmm. That's easier. Like the wineries do this. But back then, you had to depend on a strong yeast that happened to drop in and could survive this lactic acid-rich environment. They call that Yanetsuki Kobo, which is basically, Yanetsuki means yeast hanging from the rafters is a rough translation. That's one that would drop in and only the strongest would survive, because if it's a yeast that can't handle the lactic acid environment, that's not the one you want anyway, because it's not going to carry your fermentation forward. Which is why during this period, they would go to different breweries that had a great yeast, and they would try to isolate it so other people could use it, right? Because this one is very strong. So you can they actually started numbering the yeasts. But anyway, so this method of pounding, you're going to hear this, called Yama Oroshi. And I showed you this picture. They've got, they put this rice sludge, this real thick paste, into these hangiri. It's like a little open bucket, shallow bucket. And they're pounding it with these paddles. They call those kai, but they're just two guys, one on each end, and you see them just beating this stuff into a paste. This is a very labor-intensive operation. You saw that. There's guys lined up the whole way up and down. So you needed a lot of men to do it, and it took a lot of time to do it. So what basically you want to beat that paste, that process of beating the stuff into a paste is called Yama Oroshi. So the term Yama means mountain. Oroshi or Orosa means to come down. So we're like, well, why do they call it coming down from the mountain? Well, the reason is, and this could be an apocryphal story, but one reason they said if you didn't have a cold enough area, because they were brewing in the winter, right? They were forced to brew in the winter. But if it wasn't cold enough in your area, they would actually take that bucket up to the top of a mountain where it was cooler, and they would beat the rice paste there, and then they would bring it down the mountain. That's why it's called Yamaoroshi. So it's
When you say labor intensive, that's an understatement.
correct.
I mean, imagine how many times you've got to do that to get a few barrels of wine. I mean, good heavens.
Yeah, incredibly. And think about it. You're still not guaranteed that it's not going to spoil. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think of this sake? I love this.
I think it's off the hook. It's really different from some of the others.
Yeah, it's on the drier side. That's
Yeah,
why
but
it's-
not too dry.
No, it's all relative with sake. It's always got a little bit of residual sugar in it. I mean, the ones that are super dry, and I've seen them much drier than this, I don't think they're as pleasant. You start to lose the mouthfeel on them. Rob, what do you think?
Exceptional. I think it's really good.
Yeah.
So like the
This is-
found like the mouthfeel was very like brown. Is it because of the way that the Kimoto style or?
Well, the Kimoto style, so it's hard to define exactly what a Kimoto style is because, like I said, they're not making it exactly like the old process. It's very unlikely that they are not. They're probably adding yeast from a lab because it would be way too risky to depend on
Yeah,
the yeast
ambient
dropping.
yeast.
Yeah, your some
Got your
ambient-
nice virile yeast.
dropping from the rafters. It's too risky. So, but if you were able to do that, that's considered to be the pinnacle of Kimoto, is to depend and get that yeast from your environment. But it's very rare for people to do that today because there's just too big of a risk, too much money at stake. But you get most of the flavors. A lot of times you'll get a little bit higher acidity and just sometimes some gamey flavors. But there's a lot of overlap because you can use different yeast to get different profiles or make them fruitier.
I would say this reminds me more of a grape wine than any of the other sakes that we've tried. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm drinking Pinot Noir here, but it has more of the grape wine elements to it than the other sakes I think we've tried. Does that make sense at all?
Yes, and the interesting thing about this, and we'll actually we'll have a whole show on heating sake. This actually would be good, like we're drinking it now, chilled. It would also be good room temperature and slightly warmed.
Okay.
But so what we will do for a future show is we'll just get some heating baths up here and dial it all in.
All right. We're going to continue on the other side talking about the process and the sake with the Secret Wine Society on the Wake Up Call.